You know you're living in upside-down America when a woman named Karen calls 911 on a fence on my property because she claims it's threatening the neighborhood aesthetic. And here's the kicker, the fence is on my farm outside the HOA, and I built it myself 6 inches taller than her ego, apparently. But what Karen didn't know, what made this whole thing blow up in her face, is that she didn't just report a neighbor, she reported the county sheriff. And I don't take kindly to petty tyranny. Now let's back up a bit before Karen turned her self-righteous radar in my direction. I'm Jake, 63 years old, semi-retired sheriff of Whitmore County, Georgia. My wife and I moved out to a quiet little 10-acre farm just outside the city limits after I clocked out for good. We weren't looking for trouble, just chickens, sunsets, and grandkids on the weekends. Our land backs up to a suburban development, one of those shiny new HOA-plagued neighborhoods where the grass must be 5 inches tall. Mailboxes are uniform, and heaven help you if your shutters are off color. Taupe enter Karen. She lives in the last house on the HOA boundary closest to my property. Probably thought that gave her jurisdiction over my fence line. She introduced herself the first week we moved in. You know, the tight pearls and daylight clipboard in hand and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She said she was the acting president of the HOA Architectural Compliance Committee. I said I was the sheriff of the whole damn county. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. A few weeks later, I built a fence, just a basic post and rail with mesh for the goats. Yes, goats. We're old, not dead. 8 feet tall, solidly within zoning laws. I even called the county office myself to double check before starting, but apparently Karen believed her. HOA rules applied to my land. One morning, I found a laminated notice zip-tied to my fence. It read, unapproved structure, subject to fine contact HOA within 10 business days. Lady, this isn't a cul-de-sac. This is county land. You don't get to slap fines on my livestock enclosure. So I called her. Told her politely at first that her authority doesn't extend outside her white picket fiefdom. She didn't like that. Next day I saw her out front taking pictures of the fence, measuring tape in one hand, phone in the other. Full investigative reporter mode. Then came the 911 call. I kid you not, dispatch rings me on my day off. Jake, we got a trespass complaint on your property. Some lady saying your fence is illegal and causing emotional distress. Emotional distress. From a fence, I told the deputy to handle it. He rolled out, talked to Karen, took one look at the fence and confirmed exactly what I already knew. Completely legal. Completely outside HOA territory. Completely not her damn business. But this wasn't just about the fence. Oh no, see? Karen wasn't just annoyed, she was embarrassed. And nothing makes a petty tyrant more dangerous than public embarrassment. So she hatched a plan. One involving technicalities, manipulated bylaws, and a surprise vote to annex my property into the HOA. She thought she could force my land under her jurisdiction retroactively. But what Karen didn't count on is that I know the law, I know the county board, and I've got a few friends in places she can't laminate her way into. Now, folks, if you thought Karen would take that little 911 embarrassment and go quietly back to pruning her hydrangeas. Oh no, Karen is the type to triple down. She doesn't get mad, she gets organized. A week after the fence fiasco, I started noticing SUVs parked outside her house at night. Same 3 or 4 neighbors. Same whispering huddles on the front porch. Then my buddy Frank, he's on the Whitmore County Zoning Board, calls me and says, hey Jake, you aware that your property's being discussed in the HOA's annual charter review next week? Excuse me, that's when it all clicked. Karen was trying to pull the oldest HOA power move in the book, a property line annexation, sneaking in a vote to extend HOA jurisdiction to adjacent parcels for community harmony. Sound fancy? It's not, it's a snake move. And if you don't show up to stop it, they'll just pass it by default. Well, guess who did show up? Picture it. A folding table, bad coffee, one very shaky microphone, and a room full of retirees pretending this is the United Nations. Karen stood up front like she was running for Senate neighbors. She says we have an opportunity to protect our property values by ensuring the surrounding land reflects the standards of our community. Translation: Jake's goat fence is upsetting my HOA fantasy land. Then she unveils a little slideshow. Yep, a whole PowerPoint presentation titled Community Aesthetic Threats. The fence next door, she even had an aerial drone photo of my backyard. Don't worry, that tidbit came in very handy later. Then came her proposal. Motion to include parcel 118C into the HOA jurisdiction effective retroactively to January 1st. That was my land, 10 acres. She wanted to backdate control over my property to claim my fence violated their guidelines. Now here's where it gets good. I stood up in the back, let the room fall quiet. Good evening, I said. I'm Jake Henderson. I own parcel 118C. I'm also the elected sheriff of this county. And Karen, I believe we have some things to clarify. You could hear a pin drop. She didn't know I was coming. She definitely didn't know. I brought a copy of the county zoning map, the property plat, and get this, a signed letter from the county commissioner confirming that my land is outside all HOA jurisdiction and cannot be annexed without full consent from the property owner, which, to be clear, I had not given. Nor would I ever, Karen tried to interrupt, but we voted. We have the right to? No, you don't, I said, holding up the map. You have the right to manage your subdivision, not agricultural and zoned rural residential, not my land, and certainly not with fake drone surveillance and a PowerPoint. Then I pulled out the real kicker. By the way, Karen, did you get FAA authorization for that drone footage? She blinked. What? Because flying a drone over the private property without consent, especially for surveillance, can be considered a violation of both FAA low-altitude flight rules and Georgia's privacy statute. And as sheriff, I'd be obligated to open an investigation into that. Silence. One guy in the back actually coughed from laughing. Now at this point, the room was turning. Half the neighbors looked horrified. The other half looked like they'd been waiting years for someone to knock Karen down a peg. But here's where Karen really messed up. She had pushed this whole annexation vote through based on the claim that all adjacent properties were unoccupied or undeveloped. In other words, she lied in the official record and lying on HOA documents. Yeah, that's called fraud. So I calmly handed a printed copy of the HOA bylaws highlighted to the board chair. Page 14, section 6.2, I said. Any member found to have falsified information to influence a vote may be subject to removal from office pending review. The board chair paled. He looked at Karen, then turned to the room and said, I think we need to table this motion indefinitely. Karen stormed out. But oh, folks, it didn't end there. 2 days later, I got a visit from a local code enforcement officer, Saeed. He received an anonymous complaint that my fence was blocking a historic right-of-way. I asked for the complaint in writing. Guess what name was blacked out under complainant? Yep, Karen. So I invited the officer in, showed him the original land deed from 1957. No right-of-way, no access easement, not even a footpath. He laughed, apologized, and closed the case on the spot. But I wasn't done. See, I'd been doing a little digging myself. Turns out Karen had plenty of skeletons in her very neatly trimmed closet. Like that her backyard shed was actually a converted studio apartment without a permit, or that she'd approved her own deck extension without a second HOA signature. Violations, oh yes. Many. So I filed 3 separate reports with the county building inspector, then sent a polite little letter to the HOA board listing the violations, asking if they might want to conduct a leadership review. 2 weeks later, Karen was removed as HOA president in a 7-2 vote. Her deck was flagged for inspection, her permit was denied, and her once pristine little kingdom. It's now managed by a new president named Linda. She brings cookies to meetings. Now you'd think after being booted from the HOA board, slapped with 3 code violations, and publicly embarrassed in front of her own little kingdom, Karen would finally take the L and fade into her overpriced patio furniture. But not our Karen. No, sir. 2 months go by. Quiet ones. The new HOA board is running smoothly. Folks are happier. Fewer complaints about non-compliant mailbox colors. The goats are thriving. Then, like a bad sequel nobody asked for, Karen resurfaces. It started with a flyer on everyone's mailbox. Laminated, of course. Whitmore Neighborhood Safety Coalition. Protecting our streets. Monitoring suspicious behavior. Voluntary watch patrol meetings. Every Thursday. Guess who's the founder? Karen, naturally. Only this time she's not trying to annex property or fight fences. She's trying to turn herself into a one-woman sheriff's department with walkie-talkies. Now let me be clear. Neighborhood watch programs, totally fine. I even encourage them when they're done right. But what Karen set up wasn't your average see something, say something system. This was more like see someone jogging who doesn't live here, interrogate them like it's a courtroom. She created her own logo, an eagle holding binoculars, wore a vest that said Community Safety Enforcement in bold yellow letters, and she started patrolling the neighborhood in a golf cart complete with an orange beacon, light and clipboard. I got wind of it when my neighbor Dale Sweet Guy, 72, Vietnam vet, told me. Karen stopped him at the mailbox. She said my car had been parked over the curb line for 2 hours and that she was documenting it for the record, he said. What record? Exactly, but here's the kicker. Karen wasn't just pretending. She was keeping files, names, license plates, photos. She even set up a private Facebook group titled Whitmore Eyes Open, internal reports only, and wouldn't you know it, someone leaked me a screenshot. Guess who had her own folder labeled Jake H? Fence issue? Yeah. She was still tracking me. I might have let the clipboard game slide if she was just play acting at being important. But Karen didn't stop there. One morning, a family friend of ours, young black man named Marcus, was visiting. Pulled up in his truck to drop off eggs from his dad's farm. He's been coming around for years. 5 minutes after he left, I get a text. Did you know there was a suspicious vehicle at your property? I've filed an incident report with the County Watch program. From Karen. Now let me explain something real clear. There is no County Watch program. That's not a thing. And she had zero right to flag anyone for suspicious activity on private land. So I called Marcus. He said Karen followed him out of the neighborhood for nearly 2 miles filming from her phone. That's when I stopped being amused. This wasn't HOA antics anymore. This was harassment, borderline racial profiling, and impersonating a public official. That's a legal line, and Karen had just goose-stepped right over it. I paid Karen a visit. She opened the door with her laminated badge on. Can I help you? You sure can, I said. You're going to stop impersonating law enforcement right now? She laughed. It's just a community watch, Sheriff. You don't own safety. I handed her a letter on official county letterhead. Per Georgia Code 16-1023, impersonating a public officer is a misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in jail and a fine of $1,000. You're not with any official program. You're not certified. You don't have jurisdiction outside your own sidewalk. She turned pale. But I'm just, nope, no buts, I said. You file one more fake report, stop one more car, or use that Facebook group to profile innocent people, and I'll file a criminal complaint myself. She slammed the door. But here's the part Karen didn't know. That letter I gave her, it was a courtesy, a warning. The real storm had already been set in motion. See, I'd forwarded the Whitmore Eyes Open group screenshots, plus witness statements from neighbors, and the video she took of Marcus to the Georgia Department of Civil Rights in the Attorney General's office. 2 weeks later, Karen got a formal cease and desist order in the mail. And then the hammer dropped. An official inquiry was launched into discriminatory surveillance practices and impersonation of law enforcement. Not just local state level. Turns out Karen's little coalition wasn't just annoying. It might have been violating privacy laws, civil rights protections, and county impersonation statutes. And the golf cart turns out adding a flashing beacon. Light violates a local ordinance for unauthorized emergency vehicle impersonation. Whoops, now here's where it gets almost funny. If it weren't so sad, faced with mounting heat, Karen tried one final Hail Mary. She filed for a restraining order against me, claimed I was intimidating her by showing up uninvited and threatening her safety. The judge took one look at the case, asked for supporting evidence, and Karen whipped out her file. Bad move. The file included drone photos, street surveillance screenshots of her own incident reports, and the laminated patrol vest she wore to monitor known violators. The judge leaned over and said, "Ma'am, this looks less like harassment and more like you're running an unauthorized surveillance program. Case dismissed, restraining order denied." And Karen, well, she left court in tears. After the restraining order, stunt fell flat. In court, things around Whitmore went quiet. Too quiet. Karen disappeared from her usual posts. No laminated notes, no clipboard crusades, not even a single next-door rant about suspicious mulch colors. It was like the queen of HOA chaos had gone into exile, or so we thought. Now let me tell you, when someone like Karen goes radio silent, they're not resting, they're regrouping. And sure enough, like clockwork, she popped back up. Not as a vigilante, not as HOA president, but as the self-appointed morale officer for the annual Whitmore neighborhood picnic. Flyers everywhere come together in unity, food, games, and a message of healing from our past conflicts. I'll admit I was curious, so I showed up, wife by my side, goats left in the care of the grandkids, and oh, I brought pie. Because this wasn't just a picnic, it was a reckoning. The park was packed, folding chairs, hot dogs on the grill, kids running around, and Karen dressed in head-to-toe red, white, and blue, standing under a makeshift tent with a wireless mic. Before we begin, she said, I just want to acknowledge the challenges we've faced as a community. We've had misunderstandings, disagreements, but I believe we can move forward in unity. My wife nudged me. Did she just forgive herself? Looks like it, I said. Then came the real reason for her little speech. Karen held up a binder. I've taken the liberty of drafting a new code of conduct for all residents, whether or not you're formally within the HOA. A wave of what swept through the crowd. She continued, it's non-binding, of course, but it's a moral agreement. A way to uphold standards. Now, folks, non-binding moral code from someone under investigation is like getting a diet tip from a raccoon digging through your trash. But it got worse, she added. Anyone unwilling to sign it today? Well, it says something about their commitment to our neighborhood values, doesn't it? That's when I stood up, Karen, I said calmly. I have something better than a moral agreement. I have documents. I pulled out a folder. Inside a printed copy of the state investigation summary, per Georgia Attorney General's Office. Case number AG 22, 49 more 3 findings show that Miss Karen D., former HOA president of Whitmore Subdivision, violated privacy protections, conducted unauthorized surveillance, and used intimidation under false pretense of authority. People gasped. One guy dropped his burger. I flipped to the next page. The state has levied a $5,000 civil fine for unauthorized neighborhood patrol activities in impersonation of a county official. Karen has been ordered to disband all patrol communications and remove any signage, documentation, or organizational structure suggesting legal enforcement power. I looked right at her. And if you think that's the end of it, there's more coming. Now, that picnic didn't end with pie and lawn games. It ended with Karen storming off, dragging her folding table behind her like it owed her money. She left behind a box of unsigned moral agreements in one very awkward Bluetooth speaker, still playing patriotic music. But the fallout. Oh, it was just beginning. First, her fines became public record, $5,000 for the impersonation, another $3,200 in county penalties for unpermitted structures on her property. And the building inspector, he finally followed up on that illegal guest house in her backyard, red tag condemned, ordered removed second. Her social standing collapsed like a deck without footings. She tried to organize a support Karen rally online. Got 5 likes. 1 was her own husband. 2 of the other likes were bots. Neighbors who used to follow her lead started avoiding her at the mailbox. People whispered at potlucks. Even her friend Rhonda, who once helped her laminate those ridiculous rule flyers, returned her patio chairs with a post-it note. I no longer feel comfortable being associated with your enforcement actions. Ouch! Now here's the real silver lining in this whole disaster. The neighborhood started changing. The new HOA board got serious about transparency. They voted to create a community mediation committee, neutral folks, who help resolve disputes without jumping straight to threats and fines. They also passed a rule that no HOA officer could serve more than 1 2-year term. It was nicknamed the Karen Clause. Folks started talking to each other again. People planted gardens without asking permission. Someone even painted their door. Navy blue navy. Nobody called 911. Nobody took photos. The goats still thriving. Even got featured in the local paper's Community Spotlight headline, Sheriff's Goats Keep the Peace. Now you might be wondering, did Karen ever learn her lesson? Sort of. See, a few months later, her house went on the market. Listing said, charming home in quiet, safe neighborhood with excellent HOA leadership. We all had a good laugh over that line. But here's the thing. The fines, the code violations, the lawsuit mentions, and public records, they all came up in the disclosure paperwork. Real estate agents are legally required to inform buyers of any known issues. Karen had a stack of them. The first buyer walked. The second made an offer $40,000 under asking. She refused. It sat on the market for 9 months. Last we heard, she pulled the listing, installed privacy hedges around the yard, and hasn't spoken to a soul since the state ruling came down. Just when we thought Karen had finally crawled back into her perfectly symmetrical flower beds, a manila envelope landed in my mailbox, certified mail, return receipt requested, stamped civil summons. I opened it, and I'll admit I laughed out loud. Right there on the porch with a goat nudging my elbow. Karen was suing me. The claim, intentional infliction of emotional distress, public humiliation, and defamation. And my personal favorite, interference with neighborhood harmony. I guess she really missed her laminate. I brought the letter inside, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and called my buddy Todd, retired attorney, plays poker with me, and the boys on Thursdays. He read it and said, "She's going to wish she never filed this." He was right. Now, I wasn't about to let Karen drag my name through a courtroom without making sure she had company on the ride down. So we filed a counterclaim, and not just a petty one. We brought receipts, harassment, false reports to law enforcement, drone surveillance without consent, repeated abuse of HOA powers, all backed by police reports, screenshots, county letters, and a 12-page report from the State Civil Rights Division. Karen had opened the door and I walked right through it with steel-toed boots. Court date was set for May. Judge, one of my old acquaintances from the Sheriff's Advisory Board, didn't change the outcome, but I could tell from the moment he looked at Karen's 48-point laminated evidence summary, this was going to be fun. Now, most civil trials are dull. Not this one. Karen strutted in like she was starring in a courtroom drama, wearing a blazer, pearls, and carrying a rolling briefcase like she was about to sue Amazon. She opened with a 15-minute speech without being asked about the breakdown of neighborhood morals and how I had led a targeted campaign to dismantle communal peace. The judge leaned forward and asked, "Ma'am, do you have specific examples relevant to your case?" She flipped through color-coded tabs and produced, get this, a photo of my goat captioned, "Visual pollution and noise contributor." I swear to you, on the record, she tried to blame a goat for emotional trauma. My lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, we'd like to remind the court that the plaintiff has already been fined by the state for harassment related to these same incidents." Judge nodded. "And I've reviewed those records." Karen looked like someone had unplugged her. But it wasn't over yet. Her next exhibit, a printout of my Facebook post from the day of the HOA picnic. It read, "Karen just tried to pass a moral contract like she's the sheriff now. She's one drone away from a Netflix documentary." She called that defamation. My lawyer stood up again. "Your Honor, the plaintiff is a public figure within her community, was under investigation by the state at the time of the post, and importantly, this post is clearly opinion and satire protected under the First Amendment." The judge didn't even need to deliberate motion to dismiss the defamation portion of the claim. "Let's proceed to your counterclaim." You could almost hear her soul deflate. Now, I'm not one for dramatics, but when I got up to testify, I made it plain and simple. Karen called 911 multiple times over legal structures. She harassed guests on my property. She impersonated law enforcement. She created surveillance records on neighbors without consent. And even after being warned by both county and state officials, she kept escalating. Then I handed over the final piece, a sworn affidavit from Marcus, the young man she followed for 2 miles, describing her tailing him in a golf cart, filming and narrating his every move on her phone. The courtroom went stone silent. The judge took one long look at Karen. "Ms. D, I'm inclined to believe this was not merely a misunderstanding. You have a documented pattern of targeting your neighbor, misusing civil processes, and abusing your former HOA role." Then he dropped the hammer judgment in favor of the defendant on all counts. Plaintiff's claim is dismissed with prejudice. Counterclaim is granted. Damages awarded. $11,000, Karen gasped. My lawyer just smiled. "Now, folks, I'm not a vindictive man, but that $11,000, we used every last cent of it to fund something special. The Whitmore Community Garden, built right on the edge of my property, with a goat statue at the entrance. We named it Karen's Corner, not to mock, to remember, to remind ourselves what happens when petty power meets real accountability." Karen's house finally sold 6 months later. She moved to another HOA across town. Rumor is she tried to run for their board, didn't even make it past the nominations round. Nowadays, Whitmore is peaceful. Folks wave more, fewer rules, more community, and not a laminated flyer in sight. So to everyone who stuck around through 5 parts of this wild ride, thanks for listening to the story of a woman who tried to turn a neighborhood into a kingdom and ran smack into a sheriff who knew how to read a map, a law book, and a woman's nonsense from a mile away. And if you're dealing with a Karen of your own, just remember the law is slow, but when it hits harder than a goat with a running start. Want more real-life revenge tales like this one? Stick around. I've got stories from the force, the farm, and folks who found justice in the strangest places. It's been about 6 months since Karen packed up her hedge trimmers and drove off into the HOA sunset. And you know what? The neighborhood feels different. Not just quieter, not just easier. It feels more human. No more laminated threats on mailboxes. No more side-eye at yard art. No more golf cart stakeouts like we're living in a made-for-TV police procedural. Instead, we've got potlucks, porch chats, and kids selling lemonade without a permit in sight. Imagine that. The community garden is thriving. Tomatoes squash wildflowers. And yes, the goat statue's still standing tall, right next to a little wooden sign that reads, "Grow things, don't control them." Funny thing is, Karen's departure didn't just remove conflict, it sparked something. Folks started asking questions. Why did we let one person control so much? What else could we fix now that we're not wasting time policing mailbox paint? Now, I'll be honest with you, this whole experience gave me more gray hairs than my grandkids and more paperwork than my last 6 months as sheriff, but it also taught me a few things I want to pass on. 1, bullies come in all shapes and sweaters. Sometimes they don't shout, they just smile while slipping a rulebook under your door. The law isn't just for courtrooms, it's for protecting your peace. Don't be afraid to use it, but don't abuse it either. That's how Karens are born, and community is built by connection, not control. The best neighborhoods aren't the most compliant ones. They're the ones where folks look out for each other without being asked, and perhaps most important of all, revenge feels good, but restoration feels better. Winning in court was satisfying, sure, but watching my neighbors plant sunflowers where resentment used to grow, that was healing. You know, I used to think retirement meant riding off into the sunset. Turns out sometimes you ride right into a laminated nightmare. But now sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee, a view of my fence, and not a drone in sight, I feel like the real payoff wasn't the $11,000 judgment or the end of Karen's reign. It was this getting to tell this story to you. Because I know some of y'all are out there dealing with your own Karen. She might be running your HOA, your church committee, your office cubicle. Maybe she's a neighbor, maybe she's a relative, and maybe you've been wondering if it's just you, if maybe you're overreacting. Let me tell you right now, you're not, and you're not alone. I've shared my story. Now I want to hear yours. Have you ever had a run-in with a neighborhood tyrant? Know someone who abused their HOA power or tried to control things that weren't theirs to control? Drop your story in the comments below. Don't worry, you can change the names if Karen still lives down the street. If you don't have a story, tell me this. What would you have done if you were in my boots? Let's swap stories. Let's swap wisdom. You never know who might read your comment and feel just a little more empowered to stand up for themselves. If you stuck with me through all 6 parts, first of all, thank you. All are the reason I kept telling this tale one fence post at a time. But if you're hungry for more real-life stories of small-town drama, everyday justice, and the good kind of payback, hit that subscribe button. Give the video a like if you cheered when the judge dropped the gavel. And share this story with someone who's been wronged by a clipboard warrior. I've got plenty more where this came from. Stories from the force, from the farm, and from neighbors who found justice in the least expected places. I'll leave you with this. Power doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it comes with a clipboard and a smile, but so does resistance, so does community, so does peace. You don't need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes all you need is the truth, the law, and maybe a few goats. Stay strong, stay kind. And remember, the only thing scarier than a Karen is a calm, prepared neighbor who knows their rights.